What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Tape. Excited to bring this episode your way. Happy weekend to everyone. Hopefully you're getting a chance to relax, watch some college football. And when you're watching this, I believe we're going to post this on Sunday morning. So let me know what you think about this, change in when we're trying to upload some of this content. I'm kind of toying around with, midweek versus weekend, when it's best to have our draft content come out versus fantasy football. So if you have any thoughts about when you're seeing this and whatnot, when it's best for you, I'd love to hear those thoughts down below in the comment section. But what are we talking about, TJ? Quit talking about the schedule. Today, we're talking about my updated top 5 players at each and every position groups. We're right around midway through the college football season and the NFL season, not quite there, but pretty close. So I wanted to go ahead and get some updated top 5s out there. This is still a very fluid process. A lot is going to change. And especially, once we get into the college football playoff, we're going to get to see a lot of these prospects in high leverage spots. And I'm very curious to see how they respond to those situations. So this is not a finalized top 5, but this is just kind of where the year has taken me so far this season. And I want to give you an update as, we're at this point in the year, my summer rankings, there's definitely been a lot of changes there. So I want to give you some updated top 5s. Once the season's done, we'll do, updated position rankings then, and then post combine, once we have official measurements, heights, weights, we're getting to see some of these guys at the Senior Bowl, at the Shrine Bowl, things like that. There will be, of course, again, updated position rankings, and that'll be good. I think it's fun here. I'm giving you kind of the 30,000-foot view. Here are the top 5 guys. These are the best of the best at each spot. But once we get into that spot, that's when we get to have some really fun conversations about like, hey, this guy's receiver 11, but man, this spot of the board, he'd be a really interesting fit for this team. So I know there's a lot of people who watch. That's the conversations they want to have. They want to get in the weeds. Today is more of that kind of over the top look, looking at the top guys. But I'm excited to be able to dive into the weeds with you all as this process unfolds. And of course, I want to hear your position rankings down below in the comment section. Who's your top 5 quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, so on and so forth. Would love to hear those thoughts down below. If you're watching on YouTube, definitely give us a subscribe as well. Or if you want to reply back to the post on X / you can slide into my DMs, if you will. You can give me your updated, your position rankings this far into the season as well. All right. Without further ado, let's jump into quarterbacks. That's the most important position, right? That's where everyone wants to know where we're at. Number 1 for me is going to be Dante Moore still. I know last week against Indiana wasn't the sexiest of games, no doubt about it. But nevertheless, especially, and I remember watching on Saturday being like, definitely the most disappointing game for Dante so far. But then you get to the L-22, and really, I think Indiana just out-physicaled Oregon across the board. That's not to make an excuse for Dante Moore. It was definitely his most, lack of a better phrase, lackluster game so far. But hit a deep shot. That was a Will Stein touchdown, if we want to give out credit. That's Oregon's OC. He perfectly schemed up against that coverage, the rollout, safety drops down, and then Moore delivers a perfect, ball over the top. So mostly a Will Stein touchdown, but Moore executes. And other than that, it was tough sledding. The offensive line really for Oregon did not play well. I actually really like their center, but he got pushed around a little bit in that game. And I say world, it's been a tough go at it all year long, really. Alex Harkey's definitely Garth next level. Not my favorite guy. Excuse me. And then the receivers too, like they had a hard time creating consistent separation. Sadiq was, fine. We'll talk about him later on, but it wasn't, a takeover game from him either. So really, I think Oregon, especially on the offensive side, all 11 were out physical. And I think Indiana wanted to make a statement, and that they did, and case in point by their linebackers, now they played that game. All that to say, yes, most lackluster game of the year so far for Dante Moore. He didn't, he had the 2 interceptions late. One's a batted pass. One, he's a little late to make that second, fourth quarter interception. He's a little late to make that throw, but he also has his right guard take out his back foot. So the ball doesn't get there with as much zip as he normally throws with because he doesn't have a base underneath him. So not to make excuses, but I think there were outside external factors that kind of led us to where we ultimately got in that game and why it wasn't so pretty for Dante Moore and really why it wasn't so pretty for that Oregon offense. But case in point, though, he is the best pure passer in this class. Yes, I know the number of starts he has is definitely an outlier when you look at Todd McShay. Love some of the things he brings up. Some of it, he just does it his way. That's totally fine. But he did bring up a great point. When you look at the amount of college starts every starter across the NFL has right now, like Dante Moore would be the outlier of outliers there. That being said, him and, Ty Simpson, when we get to him, they have made very mature decisions. So Moore's the best pure passer in this class. And you're telling me there's this guy who struggled at UCLA, decided to not go chase a bag, go find a starting opportunity at a lower level program. Instead, he went to Oregon, sat for a year, and looks all the better for it. So best pure passer, like the arm. He's very CJ Stroud-like to me. Maybe not even, I think Stroud might have been a little bit better of an athlete, but I don't know. Stroud, even in his time at Ohio State, there were some games where you saw him create outside of structure, some you didn't. We've kind of seen that with Dante Moore. Not a whole lot of opportunity to create outside of structure against Indiana, but there were plenty of opportunities to do that against Penn State, and he rose to that occasion. So he is very kind of CJ Stroud to me, and I just love in that Penn State game, which I know Penn State, now they look like a joke, but that game was kind of what started to make them unravel, and that's a tough environment for him to step into, but was huge on 3rd and 4th downs, rose to the occasion, and just looked like a player with more poise, more composed than you would think, given the amount of starts he has. So for me, it's still Dante Moore. I do think, all that said, he may be the top quarterback option for me in this class. He'd probably be wise to go back and start, and he may be the front runner for the 2027 group. I know Arch, maybe a little bit better the last couple of weeks, but if we were to do a way too early 27 mock and, Moore doesn't declare for 26, I'd probably put him as the top guy for 27. Lenoir Sellers, a lot of the same could be said there. I do think he'll end up declaring this year. He still holds on the ball for too long, and that's kind of the one thing, right? Like the LSU sack, which, by the way, I'm filming this right around big noon kickoff on Saturday, October 18th. So, if anything crazy happens today, again, I'm trying to tinker with when we put out some of the stuff and adjust our schedule a little bit. So, if anything crazy happens on Saturday the 18th, I apologize. But, what I have most recently for Sellers was that LSU game. I don't think it's as bad. I know it wasn't super sexy, the stats, the box score, none of that looks great. Even the PFF grades, I know that's a big topic of conversation right now, but even that wasn't super sexy. But really, it's a South Carolina offensive line that struggles. They don't have a whole lot of receiver talent that I like around him. It's kind of just Lenoir Sellers being the offense, and also took a couple of big shots to the ribs later on in that first half too. So was he playing at 100%? Hard to say. But in the first half, he takes a sack, takes him out of field goal range. So there's still a little bit of that refinement, but I think overall, week over week, we're seeing improved accuracy underneath the intermediate parts of the field. He throws a beautiful deep ball. He's got a big arm. Of the guys, of these 5 guys here, he's got more starts than Moore and Simpson too. So he's not this guy who, yes, he is young. He's 20 years old, but he's not completely green, which is definitely a big plus. But really, it just comes down to how long he holds on the football. That being said, he's not Anthony Richardson. He's got more starts under his belt. I know I've seen some of that, that comp out there. He is a freak athlete. I don't even know if he's quite the athlete of Richardson, but that's just because Richardson was built in a lab. But Sellers, phenomenal athlete, love the big arm. But honestly, I think he's a more accurate passer than where Richardson was when he left Florida. And he's got more starts under his belt, which gives me more confidence for how he might translate to the next level. Really, it is just getting the ball out of his hands quicker, which some of that's the college game, and that's going to have to naturally translate to the next level. And some of that is just Lenoir Sellers being an outlier to some of these other guys in this class. Then I've got Ty Simpson at 3. In so many ways, he has been what I wanted Garrett Nussmeier to be this year. And I'll say the same thing about Josh Hoover in a little bit and just with a different prospect. But this guy, B plus level arm, B plus level athlete. He's not Lenoir Sellers, but he can do enough with his legs to create and hold you honest there. But his eyes, his vision, his anticipation, his accuracy, that's where this guy excels, right? And he can read out from right side of the field, 1, 2's not there. When I go to the backside dig, 3's not there. I'm going to take off and run. His processing ability and ability to see the field is up there, and honestly, might be the best in the class. And that's part of what we had James Foster on the show a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to him, and he was like, "I'd be surprised if he's not my quarterback 1, just because of how he can read it out and decipher it and be quick on his reads." And I totally understand that. He is definitely the guy that Dante Moore doesn't have a lot of starts, but Ty Simpson has even less. So there is that part of the equation for Simpson. But that being said, he's a guy who sat for 3 years, right? 1 year behind Bryce Young, 2 years behind Jalen Milroe. So hasn't seen the field a whole lot, but he's an experienced college player. He's very mature in the fact that he was willing to sit back for 3 years. What 5-star recruit is doing that nowadays? Ty Simpson's the only one I can think of. And maybe I'm just missing out on somebody. But he could have gone and chased a bag and gone to a lower level program, but he stayed with his commitment to Alabama. And now he's getting this opportunity. And I know the Florida State game was a tough way to start the year for Bama, but I don't even think he's the reason they lost that game. And then he's been nailed in every big game since then. So enough mobility, enough arm strength to make some tight window throws, but really he's a quick, decisive decision maker, and he's willing to attack over the middle of the field. And he trusts his receivers, right? I go back to, I think it was the Georgia game, right? You have the big Ryan Williams, deep ball over the middle of the field, deep down, between the hashes. Williams drops it. Would have been a walking touchdown. Next play goes right back to him, right? That's just, he operates a clean operation and he runs it at a high level, runs it at a high efficiency. So that's the sort of stuff where he he quarterbacks at a high level, if that makes sense. And that plus just enough tools, I think, makes him a really appealing draft prospect. But he's another guy, like, could go back to school because of the amount of starts he has, and like would probably be all the better for it as a prospect next year. But someone's got to be quarterback one, right? Like someone's gonna have to declare this year and gonna have to get drafted in the first round, because it's a position that gets drafted. At least one guy. If Kenny Pickett can go round one, then like someone's gonna have to this year. So if Simpson declares, if he's thinking about it, I think the advisory committee is going to give him some decent grades, especially with what we've seen so far. Fernando Mendoza comes in at number 4. I love Corey Kinnon's Matt Ryan comp. That's definitely there. Enough mobility, and I think he's kind of like Matt Ryan accounted for inflation, right? Like Matt Ryan, that was 2007 draft, 2008, 2007. Wow, going back into the archives there. But around that ballpark, and now it kind of feels like Mendoza's that version of where Matt Ryan was, but Matt Ryan was, not a great athlete for that time period, but now everyone's bigger, faster, stronger, and in turn, Mendoza kind of same thing, bigger, faster, stronger than Ryan, but kind of fits into the same wider picture with the rest of the landscape of college football and the NFL. But a coordinated athlete can escape when needed to, has an NFL arm, especially attacking outside the numbers, right? Like this guy throws to the sideline with an abundance of confidence. It's not an A-plus arm, but it's enough of an arm to be able to make those tight window throws. You saw that last week against Oregon. Him and Elijah Surratt were on another one, and that's the type of relationship where, especially, like I could see, I'm not saying he's Baker Mayfield, but like where Baker loves throwing to big body receivers, and he has a lot of success throwing to other guys too, like Chris Godwin and Emeka Egbuka, but like Evans has been his guy. And even since before that, big body receivers have always kind of been Baker's thing. If Mendoza can have the same sort of thing where he can have his own little Elijah Surratt, right? Or like what we see with Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton, where you get that big body guy you trust a ton, he could be in a really good spot at the next level. Operates RPOs at a high level. Now, some of that is like, the college system puts him in an advantageous spot, but some of it's also, you got to be a quick, decisive decision maker. And when you got to throw, you got to get the ball out quick, and it's got to be on the money, because the margin for error is very slim between completion or leaving your receiver out to dry, and he's going to take a big hit and it's going to be a drop or a turnover. So, I give him a lot of credit. It is collegey, it is RPO heavy. It's, a part of the scheme, but he operates it at a high level. Plus, the last couple of weeks, you're seeing more and more of those throws to the sideline, stretching a defense. He's got a big enough arm to be able to attack over the top as well. And you'll see that throughout the rest of the season with Omar Cooper. Like Surratt's kind of their sideline guy. Cooper's kind of the middle of the field, the more explosive, more dynamic athlete. So you can do more as a separation standpoint over the middle and deep down the field too. Really, it's just like how high is the ceiling for Mendoza, just because of the athletic, he's just not like an A-plus athlete, and the arm isn't like all world, but he does a lot of little things right. So it's one of those things where, especially if Moore goes back for 27, Seller, Simpson, all of a sudden he becomes like the steady Eddie, probably number 1 overall pick, because you know what you're getting, kind of almost, again, akin to like Matt Ryan the year he went number 1 out of BC. So very similar situations there. And then I got Josh Hoover here at 5. Garrett Nussmeier was my preseason QB6. QB2. He'd probably be my QB6 right now. Slow down, Teej. But Josh Hoover, he's kind of been what I wanted Cade Klubnik to be, right? And honestly, I think he's got a little bit of a stronger arm, or he has a stronger arm than Cade Klubnik, while still being, a spunky enough athlete to be able to create. But another one of these guys who's willing to attack over the middle of the field, decisive, trusts his receivers, good ball placement when he's going up and trying to let those guys make plays. So in a lot of ways, he is kind of, Simpson doesn't declare, like Hoover kind of becomes like, oh, well, I like Simpson, but he's not in this draft class, so maybe Hoover's our guy. Like I could see some similar overlaps. If you like Simpson, you probably like Josh Hoover. And again, just enough of an athlete. I'm kind of looking at him as like, I would probably take him like Moore, Seller, Simpson, Mendoza. I think right now, if I were to do a mock and all 4 of those guys in the class, they probably go round 1. Hoover's kind of like the line of demarcation where it's like probably early second. Same thing with Nuss. I know the arm looked a little bit better against South Carolina. Where's that oblique injury at? How healthy really is he? But he could be another one of those guys where maybe he's late 1, maybe it's top of the second. Hoover in that same fringe, just because tools aren't all world. He plays at TCU, so it's not a P4 conference. He's got some P4 opponents. And sometimes I think the fact that it's not an A-plus arm and his willingness to attack the middle of the field gets him into trouble too. So little things like that. But all in all, good body work, a good, strong leader. He's a little bit smaller, right? He's 6 foot. He's not the most impressive, like, oh my God, that's the quarterback. Put that guy at the front of the locker room. Doesn't have that kind of prowess, but could be kind of Bo Nix light, right? Like a good leader, athletic enough, and just strong enough arm to be able to stretch and throw at all 3 levels and attack the sideline. So it's just his decisiveness and his willingness to be an aggressive passer that kind of, for me, overcomes some of the drawbacks, right? Like if you're not going to have an A+ arm, you got to be on the money when attacking over the middle of the field or making that sideline throw, because your margin for error is much smaller than someone like Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Joe Milton, which he's not a starter, but like just from like an arm talent and being able to make those power throws, they have more margin for error because they can just zip it in more than obviously someone like a Josh Hoover. But right now, that's my top 5. And again, Garrett Nussmeier is probably QB6. And it's just going to be really interesting to see the rest of the way which one of these guys decide to declare for 26, 27. So quarterback's still very much up for grabs. Let's get on to running backs. Jeremiah Love, no doubt. I mean, it was a slow start to the year, but really ever since week 1, he's been awesome, full head of steam, big playability. And also I've loved how much Notre Dame has used him as a pass catcher, both out of the backfield, but even lining him up in the slot. Like that has been a really nice change of pace. And as a Notre Dame fan, I love to see it because he's our most dynamic playmaker for sure. And, when it came to preseason conversations, I didn't have him in that, like top 3 running backs I've ever scouted: Saquon, Bijan, Jeanty, like those, and all blue chippers in their respective classes. To me, Love was probably a half tier, half step down below that. But, if he expanded his receiving game, I could see a world where he works his way into that conversation, right? Because like Jeanty, not last year at Boise State, but the year before, great receiving threat. Bijan at Texas, awesome pass catcher. And when you got to see from Saquon, he brought that to the table as well. But Notre Dame never really asked Love to do that. So that's kind of where I thought there was more meat on the bone for him to add to his kind of overall draft prospect status. And we've seen that so far this year. So if he keeps it up, I think he'd probably be the 4th out of those 4 guys, but he might end up being a blue chipper when I like sit down, look at my big board and say, hey, who are the absolute must-have best players of this class? Love, if he keeps it up, may put himself into blue chip status. Jonah Coleman's my type of running back. That said, 5'9", 228, pump that into my veins and then some. I love these bowling ball build running backs. If you followed me on my own personal YouTube channel, like Blake Corum, like I just love these contact balance, muscle hamsters. And that's exactly what Coleman brings to the table. But he's also very light on his feet. He's way more shifty than you would think for 228 with just enough long speed to make probably not an 80-yard run, but he could break off a 50-yarder, I think, at the next level. And that's just enough explosiveness to where I think he comes close to giving you pretty much a whole package. Solid pass catcher too, willing to be a run blocker too. Like he kind of brings some of the stuff that Amari and Hampton brought to the table, where I thought Hampton was a solid, run blocker just because like I'm big, I'm strong, I dare you to go through me. I'm going to step up and I'm going to make this block. And Coleman kind of has that mentality while also being an awesome runner and an adequate pass catcher. Justice Haynes, a guy that I didn't have ranked. I'll be honest. I didn't really know what to get or expect from him coming into the season. Liked what I saw at Bama, but was kind of playing as a second fiddle to Jam Miller. But now at Michigan, man, he fits their identity. They still want it. Yes, they have the number 1 overall recruit playing quarterback, and he's making $12 million, whatever, in NIL money. But they still want to run the rock and play defense. That's still like the Michigan MO until they give out a ton of money this offseason to receivers. And then next year is probably Bryce Underwood's team. But that being said, like it's been Justice Haynes' team this year. I think he's listed at 210, but I'm going to say he's probably a little bit bigger than that. Has the long speed to be able to break off the big runs. We saw that against Wisconsin. We saw it last week as well. So that plus the power, ability to lower his shoulder. He could bounce off tacklers. I think the vision's okay. I thought James Foster, when we had him on a couple weeks, brought up a good point. It's a little bit of hit or miss right now with Haynes, though, and that's definitely why, to me, there's a clear line of delineation between him and Coleman, where it's 1 yard, 3 yards, 78, -1, 1, 2, 0, 85, and it's like, holy cow. So I wish there was a little bit more consistency. I wish he got a little bit more of like what was just guaranteed to him on a routine run play. But nevertheless, he does bring the big playability while having a build that to me suggests he should be a guy who could average 4+ yards in attempt at the next level. I think it just comes down to his vision and reading it out and stop looking for the home run plays. But we have a lot of, tape left to watch for him the rest of this season. And some of that's just like Big Ten football, right? Big Ten, you win it in the trenches. It's down and dirty. It's old school football. Because that you're playing to stop the run. And then eventually a guy breaks off, gets to the second level, and Haynes has got the speed to be able to take it 70+ yards to the house. So it might just be the Big Ten of it all kind of making it look that way in my eyes. Damone Claiborne, super fast, twitchy, dynamic running back. Love what he brings to the table there. He's sub 205, so probably not going to be a bell cow at the next level and you worry about like injuries. But as a part of a running back committee, his long speed, lateral agility, and then what he can bring as a pass catcher with that skill set in open space, absolutely love him as a compliment. Like if you already have, I always default to the Steelers just because that's where my head's at. If the Steelers didn't like extend Jalen Warren and like let's just say Caleb Johnson was like having a good rookie season, Claiborne would be like the perfect guy to like pair up with that style of a running back. And frankly, again, I don't know where he would go, but like if you partnered him up with the National Jeanty, who's got big playability and he can be shifty and he can catch passes too, but like more speed, more lateral quicks, long-term running mate for the Chargers in Amari and Hampton, right? Like that could be a nice 1-2 punch in that backfield, even though let's not give up on my boy, Kamani Vidal, RB6 that year. Never wrong, just early. But anyways, hopefully I'm painting the picture of, I think this is like this is the Travion Henderson of this year's running back class, where Henderson last year, I didn't see him as a guy who was like, I want to give 20 touches a week to this guy each and every week. But he was the guy where like, dude, 12 to 15 of the right touches out of the backfield as a pass catcher, this guy could create so many big plays. And ultimately, I think that's where you get the most efficient version of him. That's Damone Claiborne. Not a full workload guy, but 15 touches a week as a pass catcher, as your in-space runner. This guy could be able to rip off some huge runs for you. So like the Jahmyr Gibbs to David Montgomery, that's probably the comp, but without calling him Jahmyr Gibbs. That's what we're talking about here with Claiborne. One of the fastest players, one of the most dynamic players, one of the most shifty players in this entire draft class. And then number 5, Jadarian Price. Like, dude, like, here's my preseason number 10. I thought I was out on an island there, having him that high in the preseason rankings. But, dude, he's just been nails this season. He's freaking awesome. And if not for Jeremiah Love, he'd be an RB1 at damn near any other program across the country. If you look at this ranking, I think other than the top 3, he'd be RB1 at any program across the country. And then maybe throw Missouri and Ahmad Hardy in there. Maybe not Florida with the blue kid as well. But even in Florida, like I can see a world where he actually is the lead back. So I don't know. There's not many teams across the country, simply put, where Price wouldn't be their top dog in the backfield. Love when he gets going forward, man. Like he is just an absolute handful to bring down. Love his vision between the tackles. I think he's shiftier than you would think for the amount of power he brings to the table. So while Love has the big plays and he's been used a ton as a pass catcher, and he's got the long speed to create those kind of highlight moments, and he hurdles guys. Price just does the dirty work, and he's gritty, and he does the work between the tackles that, isn't always super sexy, but really good vision, light on his feet, doesn't turn it over, just does a lot of the little things you need a workhorse back to do. So honestly, Jadarian Price, my RB5, and man, like what a special player. And you almost feel for him, the fact that he's got to be number 2 in that offense.
It is 32 Beat Writers season, August, when they can make you a lot of money, especially on a platform like Fast Draft. Doesn't have hundreds of best ball bro killers. So when there's an injury and you hear about it through 32 Beat Writers, you can run to the Fast Draft app and jump into a Flex 4 game. Just draft any 6 Flex players. Top 4 enter your lineup every week. Or the Rabbit, 15-round best ball. Get your quarterback wide receiver stacks, get your running back sleepers. And if you follow 32 Beat Writers, you can jump into these draft rooms and be like, oh my God, I'm avoiding this guy at all costs, and I'm gobbling up all of this other running back before the larger public is fully aware, has fully digested the ramifications of the information that 32 Beat Writers is sharing. So go get Fast Draft, type in that code 32BW. 32BW is the code. Get you a $50 deposit match on Fast Draft. Now let's go start drafting faster.
All right, let's get on to the receivers. Jordan Tyson, he's kind of a mix of like Brandon Ayuk and Matthew Golden from last year's class. Love the route running. I know he's got some drops, but a lot of it's just the sheer volume he's had. And ultimately, I think the drop rate's gone down a little bit this year. Still more football to be played, but love him as a separator. Love him as a guy who can attack all 3 levels of the field, but he especially is an assassin in that 10 to 19-yard range. He's got great acceleration, but he's also great deceleration. That's why I think he wins so much in that 10 to 20-yard range. Then we get to Mekhi Lemon. He is like built like Golden Tate, plays like Amon-Ra St. Brown / Puka Nacua, and I absolutely love him. He was my preseason receiver 2 coming into the year, top 15 player on my big board coming into the season. He's only gone up from there. He's definitely the 1B. The only reason I got Tyson ahead of him is Tyson can play X the next level. Lemon's going to be a flanker or a slot, but he's going to be an absolutely awesome one. He's never tackled where he makes a catch, and he's got way more play strength and ability to make tough grabs both over the middle and on the sideline than I think people gave him credit for coming into the season. Shifty route runner on that, consistent hands. So much to love about Mekhi Lemon. Not going to be the world's craziest athlete, and again, he's not going to play X receiver. He kind of looks like and built like Golden Tate. But I think the NFL would get more out of a Golden Tate now than they did when he was in the league. So it might be all the better for Mekhi Lemon. Denzel Boston, big body. When we had Dalton Wasserman on preseason, he comped him to Jayden Higgins. And there's definitely a lot of that in the table for Denzel Boston. I'd be curious to see what the athletic testing numbers are for Boston once we get there. Higgins was a better athlete testing-wise than I would have expected. Not by much, but just marginally better. And I could see where Boston maybe is the inverse of that, where like if you go in expecting Higgins, he maybe disappoints a little bit there. But love him as that X receiver playing against press coverage. He's a physical guy. He's really good in the red zone, works the sideline, really coordinated athlete when trying to make those tightrope catches. And then not as dynamic after the catch as Tet McMillan or some of these other big body fluid, Drake London, these types of guys. But I do think just with his sheer mass, he is a tank to bring down after the catch. And I think there's enough fluidity there where he can kind of almost Devonta Smith with a very different body type, obviously, kind of like weave his, or Marvin Harrison Jr. is maybe more the comp, where he can kind of, without being, I think I don't know. We never got the 40 from Marv, so hard to say. But that being said, where he kind of just like weaves through traffic, and then once you're there to initiate contact, he's a big guy, so he's going to fall forward for a couple more yards. Boston kind of brings that yards after the catch ability to the table, which is definitely a nice plus on top of what you're getting from a, pure prototypical X receiver in my eyes. Carnell Tate, a lot of the same can be said. And honestly, Tate, the way he looks, he might be the better athlete. Boston was higher by summer ranking, so I'm leaning a little bit into a prior there versus Tate. But to be honest, who's been the better receiver this season? It's been Carnell Tate. So may end up seeing these guys flipped sooner rather than later. And I just love how James, again, keep quoting about James Foster, he's just one of the sharpest guys in the biz. And he said preseason, Carnell Tate runs love of the game routes like he hates the game. And then this year that has completely dissipated, and I couldn't agree more. He looks more explosive, and it just looks like the, lack of a better phrase, the give a fuck's a little bit higher. Earmuffs, apologies for that. But like he just looks like he's playing with a higher sense of urgency, and you're seeing it more, especially on those like comeback routes. And really that's not something that's just not a 9, where there's like a break in the route. You're just seeing more urgency, more oomph out of his breaks, on top of being 6'4", 190 pounds and having vice grips for hands. So X receiver who's showcasing more athleticism than I thought he had coming into the season, and has a body type that makes you feel confident about him as a blocker. And all those Ohio State guys typically are solid blockers at the next level, i.e. Mick Egbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr., so on and so forth. That's just a big part of like what Brian Hartline teaches in these guys. Even Terry McLaurin, not the biggest receiver, but like hold his zone as a blocker. So Carnell Tate, like he could be receiver 3 sooner rather than later. And the number 5, man, this was probably the number 5 spot I spent the most time on because, one, I'm doing the Saturday 18th. I just watched the Miami-Louisville game from last night, and holy freaking cow, Chris Bell is a animal, 6'1", 227. So he'd probably be receiver 6. He's my honorable mention. He just had a huge game against Miami, like 136 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's a freak. And then Chris Brazzell's had some monster games for Tennessee, and he's not Jalen Hyde. He's not Dante Thornton. He actually looks like the best pure receiver talent that Tennessee's had in a long time. And then, other guys like Jeremy Bernard, who I wasn't very high on coming into the season, but like, dude, he's such a fluid athlete. And I just love what I've seen from him, even in the screen game, right? Like something I just didn't think about coming into the year about his usage at the next level. I think he could be a really useful big slot at the next level. So I've kind of grown on Jeremy Bernard a good bit too. So that's kind of, 6, 7, and 8 right there. Decided to go KC Concepcion here. I've just loved and I mean, A&M's offense and Marcel Reed as a passer from an accuracy standpoint is a little up and down for sure. But he is such a dynamic and explosive route runner out of his breaks. Long speed to challenge over the top, both from inside and outside. Not going to play X, but he could be a really interesting Z. I think it's super dynamic route runner, great in open space. That was a majority of how NC State used him, right? As a gadget underneath, yards after the catch threat. So now we're starting to see this skill set really come into a well-rounded position for KC Concepcion. Not the world's biggest guy, but I also think, and you saw this in the Notre Dame game, a couple of really nice balls that are just a little off target where he has to make an adjustment mid-air where you see the body control on display. So, 5'10", but he becomes a really interesting, Z to slot. Again, if you like Mekhi Lemon, but you can't get him, I could see a world where you're like, okay, well, Concepcion's gonna be the next guy in our rankings because we want that skill set. And if anything, he's probably the more explosive version of it with, I think a little bit more certainty that comes with Lemon versus Concepcion, but been really impressed with him. Didn't know what to expect considering 23 at NC State looks like an awesome playmaker. 24 leaves a lot to be desired. And now he's going into a new situation. But A&M's been awesome, and Concepcion has checked a ton of boxes. I think this is a really dynamic after the catch threat, but also what you could think about like a Rams offense, a Miami offense, one of these teams that gets these flankers and these slots into motion. And Atlanta would be like a Darnell Mooney replacement here with KC Concepcion would be a lot of fun to think about. That type of offense where we're going to get these guys in motion, give them a head start. Let this type of an athlete get that advantage. It's a lot of fun to think about. All right, to tight ends, I'll be honest, this is probably going to be where I'm most brief. because this is probably the position group I've watched the least. Kane Sadiq, to me, probably clear-cut the number one guy. And of any of the position groups, it's probably the one with the biggest gap between 1 and 2. Sadiq, I still don't think he's like the world's greatest route runner or anything like that, but pretty sure-handed. I like the frame. Really nice inline blocker, really good athlete, really nice weapon after the catch. So in the right scheme, could be this nice mismatch weapon, but still leaves a little bit to be desired from a pure receiving standpoint. Like who he is as a route runner and consistently getting open, finding the soft spots in zones, sitting, squatting, being QB friendly from that standpoint. So love the athlete, love the yards after the catch. Still some refinement there to be had from a pass catching standpoint, but get him the right team, get him with the right coach. You could see it coming to fruition, and then it becomes this like unstoppable force to the next level. I'll go Max Clare too. That Minnesota game kind of brought me back into the Max Clare life. I liked him a good bit coming into the season. Transferred to Ohio State, kind of had a lot of high hopes. It's an offense that runs through receivers more often than not, but it was good to see in that Minnesota game where I was like, oh, there's that route running. There's that contested catch ability. There's that athlete that can get up the seam. So we got to see a little bit more of that Max Clare that we saw last year at Purdue before he became a Buckeye. So again, a guy who can get vertical, enough route running prowess, consistent hands, and I think fine enough as a blocker. From here on, none of these guys are like all-world blockers. So Max Clare, good to see him start to get back on track. Joe Royer, tight end from Cincy. He's also at 6'5", 250. I'd be willing to say he's probably a little bit slimmer than that. He's a vertical seam running tight end, but he makes those tough grabs over the middle. Him and Justin Jolly, who would have probably been the next guy up here at 6, NC State tight end. Another one of these guys who makes a ton of tough grabs over the middle, runs the seam. I think Royer probably comes with a little bit more lateral quickness and a little bit more burst out of his breaks than what I've seen out of Jolly, who is definitely more of a seam runner. Or I think it's actually Justin Jolie, but either way, he's a little bit more of a seam runner, but he makes a lot of tough grabs. But I would like to see a little bit more nuance to his route tree. But again, probably the position group I've watched the least of right now. So very fluid here. Eli Stowers, the other week, Vandy's playing Bama, and his first target, he's got a foot out of bounds. So it's just these things where like really good athlete, nice after the catch threat, has a good body type to play tight end at the next level, but he looks like a guy who's year 3 at the position and a former quarterback. So there's still some like rough edges to kind of work out here with Eli Stowers, but this is one where, and he's still not the world's greatest blocker. But I think there's enough there between the body, the athleticism that I think drafted stash, and maybe by year 3, like I think about like what, and Bennett Sennett's not a comp, but situation wise, like if a team could do what the Commanders have done with Sennett and like just stash him, and then over the first 2 years of his career, just kind of build him up and fine tune some of those little places where I think he still needs to grow and learn the position. By year 3, back half that rookie contract, you might have a little weapon on your hands. So really interested to see where it goes from here for Eli Stowers. And I'm going to go Tanner Koziel, 6'7", 250. It's kind of really the body type and a guy who can get up the field. Again, not a whole lot of like burst out of his breaks. And he plays at Houston, so lower level of competition, absolutely. But just kind of a mismatched body type that I'd be really curious to see what it looks like, especially in the red zone at the next level. Not the world's greatest blocker, which you would like to see that get better, but 6'7", 250, an intriguing body type, and I like his ability to go catch the ball at its highest point. So that's kind of where he's at. Injuries would probably be 7 right behind Jolie. But again, still a lot of tight ends for me to watch. And I came into the year really excited about John Michael Gallenborg, but he's been hurt and kind of disappointing in their P4 games. To the offensive tackles, we got Francis Maui-Noah. To me, he's been the best tackle in football, and I get it. He probably a guard at the next level. But at this point, you look at the tackle class, and it's been disappointing. So I think at this point, you just draft Maui-Noah, and you let him fail at tackle. And if it's rough his first year, maybe you give him 2 years. Eventually, if he's really struggling, let's just say through 2 years, then you make him a guard. I think he's going to be an absolute ass kicker there on the inside. So I think the arm length is going to be right at 33 inches, so he's going to be right on the borderline. But he's a little squatty, and he kind of looks like a guard. But so far this season, loved his feet and pass protection, and love what he's done climbing to the second level. So get this guy into a zone blocking scheme, take advantage of his athleticism, given how big he is, and let this guy be a playmaker for your offense. And again, I would just let him fail at tackle first, especially given every one of these guys after this has been a little disappointing for me. Spencer Fano, it's been a good year, just not elite, preseason top 5 player on my board. Just not seeing the type of run game, mauling, bulldozing impact that we saw last year. And then he's still like adequate as a pass protector, right around 300 pounds. So what do you do with that? That's not necessarily ideal. Very curious to see what the official weight comes in at. And then arm length for him is going to be another conversation point too. So not all this to, kind of crap on Spencer Fano. He is my number 2 tackle, but it's a year that's left a little bit of desire. But I still think He's one of the better tackles, and you still see that athleticism. You still see that power week in and week out. It's just not as much as you saw it a year ago. And then Trevor Gooseby, he's still a little young, so it could be a guy that's a 2027 guy just to get more starting experience. But honestly, like if you told me by the end of the year Gooseby was my number one tackle, I wouldn't be too shocked just because I do like a lot of what's there, especially from a pass pro standpoint. Love his feet and ability to mirror. Long arm length's not going to be a question mark here. I think he just needs to refine his hand placement just a smidge more. I think he needs to be a little bit more consistent holding and sustaining blocks as a run blocker too. And that might be where it's like, hey, go back to school for another year, add 10 pounds of muscle, and you're going to be a top 10 pick in the next year's class. Ready? Break. Like I could totally see a world where that's his conversation with representation, his family, the, advisory committee, whoever it may be. So love the athlete, love the tools. Honestly, like at this point, like he's probably the tackle tools wise, I'm probably gravitating closest towards. It's just going to come down to, does he want to declare this year, get more starting experience? What's the prioritization there for Gooseby, and what does he hear back from the committee? Same thing with Caleb Lomu. He just looks like a guy who needs another 10 pounds of muscle added to his frame. Like him in pass pro, light feet, consistent hand placement too. Other than the Texas Tech game, I think he's looked pretty good as a pass protector all season long. As a run blocker, he leaves a lot to be desired, just not a whole lot of drive in that lower half off the line of scrimmage, and has a hard time holding and sustaining blocks. So that's why Utah typically runs off the right side, not the left side. Run behind Fano, not Lomu. But Lomu's also one of the younger guys in this class. Definitely looks like a guy who could use another year of starting experience and another 10 pounds of muscle. So that being said, though, could just go to the NFL and get that 10 pounds of muscle while not having to worry about classes Monday through Friday. So could be another one of these interesting guys. And in a class where there's so much uncertainty, right, Lomu and Gooseby could take advantage of that because they're younger prospects. And that's not fair per se. But I can see a world where it's like, let me get the 21-year-old who's on the upswing versus the senior who I kind of feel like I know who he is. And in a similar line of thinking, here's Caden Proctor, who the last 3 weeks been better. It's not great. I really didn't think that Missouri game was all that good for Caden Proctor, to be honest with you. Multiple times where Damon Wilson got into his chest, Zion Young, put some power into him. For a guy as big and as strong as Proctor is, he really just doesn't have that much of an anchor, which is interesting. And then number 15, the guy who's number 15 on Missouri, there were multiple times where he got into Proctor's chest and absolutely jolted him backwards. So does he move well given his size? Yes. Does he have some good reps? Yes. But is it really high-end, top 5, top 10 pick? No, he's definitely leaving a lot to be desired there. I think the hand placement's still consistently missing high and wide. I think he struggles with leverage. And again, for a guy that big, the anchor is really not that impressive. And also, arm length, a massive concern there. And that's probably part of the reason why when these guys get into his chest, he's just, and that's back, furthermore, let's take a step back. That's why these guys are getting into his chest, because he doesn't have that arm length to initiate contact. Proctor might be a guard at the next level too. And now he's going to be a massive behemoth of a guard. But honestly, I think he needs to go back to school. And I get it. It's impressive when you see him in the crispy package is what they're apparently calling it because he loves Krispy Kreme donuts. But if he's 366, I'm telling you, he's 380, 385. He needs to get down to 360 next year, be a part of the 27 class, and let's see what it looks like then. You can't fix the arm length, but I think shedding 20 pounds would make him a more dynamic athlete and at least keep him lighter on his feet and allow him the chance to reset and recover when a guy does beat him with length. And also make him more consistent on the move because he's fine right now, but even that's leaving a little bit desired. It's impressive because he's 380 pounds, but imagine what it could be at 360. That's kind of where I'm at with Caden Proctor. And again, he might just be a guard. All right, so actually, we're going to go ahead and cut the video at offensive players today. I'm just running a little bit out of time, but I'm going to go ahead and do defensive players shortly here after, and we'll put that out this same week. So let me know what's better, weekends versus midweek. This week, you're going to get the opportunity to do both, or see both. Top 5 interior offensive line rankings. Connor Lew hasn't been quite the year I was hoping for, especially in pass pro. Leaves a little bit to be desired there, but when you look at it as a 2-year sample with his last year at Auburn and so far this year, you're still talking about the best center in the country, an awesome weapon as a run blocker, over 300 pounds, so you feel confident that he's not going to get bully balled up and down the field like some of these other centers who are a little bit lighter, i.e. Parker Brailsford and Logan Jones, who has short arms. So Lew checks both those boxes, and yes, he's had some pass pro inconsistencies, but also that Auburn team's just been a little disappointing. Not quite the offense I thought it was going to be, especially from a passing standpoint, but that's kind of Jackson Arnold for you. Every time you get hope, he finds a way to disappoint you. But Connor Lew's still, to me, the best center in the class. Big Iona, he's been awesome this year, and I liked him coming into the season. I think a fine athlete, but honestly might be more of a gap scheme guy. to inside zone, but wide zone, I'm not entirely sure. But he does enough to hit his landmarks and get to a spot and be adequate in zone blocking scheme. But this guy is just a big, immovable object. And that's where it's like, dude, just plug and play this guy into a gap scheme. Let him move dudes off the line of scrimmage as a run blocker and let him be big, tough obstacle standing in the way of a pass rush, right? Like, and he's got so much strength that, like, this is what, when someone gets into his chest, he sits in anchors and no one's getting through him. Like, that's what you wanted to see from Caden Proctor, given the fact he's 366, closer to 380, 385. But Ione brings that to the table, albeit on the interior. So maybe that's, again, better spot for Proctor. But I've been so impressed. I just think steady Eddie prospect here. Not necessarily a whole lot of wow, but doesn't get beaten pass pro, moves dudes off the line of scrimmage when, it's hat on a hat, and then does enough to get to his landmark. Be curious to see what his official weight is at the combine. But to me, I think a little bit, I would feel better about him in a gap scheme, but you could do some inside zone with Vega as well. I think he'd be fine at the next level. Parker Brailford, then athletic center, but he's sub 300 pounds. That's always been the conversation, right? He left Washington to go to Alabama and it was 275. This year he's up to 290. So maybe we're getting close to that 300-pound mark. But this is a wide zone center. This is like, please let this guy play for Kyle Shanahan. They definitely need a center. This would be the ideal fit. Awesome on the move. And even when he's not pulling, like, been a really awesome run blocker this year, climbs to second level. You see really good power for someone who's 290 pounds. And honestly, I think he's held up pretty well in pass protection. There's just a couple times where you're going to see a guy with longer arms or just more power get into his chest and overwhelm him. And that's like the downside of being 290. Now, he's not quite Garrett Bradbury, where you see it pretty consistently in pass protection, right? Like you see Kenny Clark ragdolling him. You see Dexter Lawrence just push him around the yard. It's not quite that frequent for Brailsford, but he's also playing college football, and it's going to be a different piece at the next level. So a little bit of a projection to be had there. But if he gets to 300 pounds at the combine, he's going to check that box. Whether that's fair or not, he's going to be water weight for sure, but he's going to check that box for a lot of teams. But love him on the move. So like wide zone scheme, get him out into space, let him transform your run game. That's what Parker Brailsford brings to the table. And honestly, like top of the second round, I'd be willing to pull the trigger on him. The first two guys, Lou and Aone, honestly, like Aone might be a late first round pick. Like it wouldn't shock me at all, just because of how in this class, 32 guys have got to go in the first round. And I don't think there's going to be 32 first round grades for me. But because of that, Ione could be like the guy where it's like, I know what his floor is. Let's pull the trigger. Let's make it happen. He's going to be a plug and play starter for us. So I can totally see a world where we get Lou and Aone in the first round. Logan Jones has been my guy. I've always been a big Logan Jones lover, defender. He's got short arms, but everything else I think he brings to the table. He plays like a guy with a wrestling background, plays with awesome leverage, fantastic on the move, and just what he lacks in arm length, he makes up in tenacious, kind of like I'm more violent than you and I'm going to beat you, that type of mentality. So I'm willing to take the flyer on it. Zach Frazier, another guy, West Virginia didn't have ideal arm length. I think Logan Jones is very Zach Frazier to me. Spoken as a Steelers fan, so obviously I love me some Zach Frazier. I think Logan Jones brings a lot of that same skill sets and strengths to the table, despite the shorter arm length. And also, like Iowa's offensive line right now is just mauling people. So love to see Jones right in the middle of that. And then Brian Parker II, right now the right tackle from Duke, but to me he's going to be a center at the next level. Doesn't have the strength or grip strength, really upper body strength or grip strength that Graham Barton had, but very good run blocker. So far this year, 94.0 run block rate. And again, I know PFF's not everyone's favorite right now, but I think that's a good snapshot of what you see when you watch this tape. This guy is very fluid, out on the move. He's very kind of Blake Miller-esque, but like the version of Blake Miller that's definitely moving into the inside. And Blake Miller's had a pretty good year, albeit Clemson's been a dumpster fire in a lot of ways. But that being said, like I can imagine Brian Parker at center where, he's at 300 pounds and it looks like he's kind of at max capacity there. So I think that's going to be kind of where he gets plugged into. That's going to be the weight that he plays at. And I think that's just enough. Once you get him on the inside, I think there's just enough there, plus his movement skills to be able to shield off blocks and become a really nice impact blocker. So it's going to have to be a zone blocking scheme, and he's going to have to play center. I don't even think guard's really in the cards. I thought that was an option for Barton, but I thought center was definitely the way to go. To me, Brian Parker, that's a center for sure. So one position flexibility is not ideal compared to what we thought we had or what we have with Barton, even playing some left tackle this year for Tampa. But nevertheless, still a big fan of Brian Parker and someone who wasn't on my radar. And then once he was, you start watching him move and you're like, yeah, get this guy, let this guy play center. Absolutely, 100%. So I was glad to see the draft community kind of bring him to my attention. So guys, apologies for having to cut this short here at offensive position updates, but we're going to do the defensive video and get that out this same exact week. So you won't be waiting long. And then I'm going to have an updated mock draft right behind it. So Lots of draft content on the horizon. Be sure to subscribe if you're watching here on YouTube. Give us a follow if you're watching on X. Give me a follow on X as well, at TJ Wingert. My last name is spelled Wengert. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, we are signing off.